All right, joined again by Sandy Stotsky, Dr. Sandy Stotsky, for our second installment of a very critical discussion, I believe, on civics and history and the place we find ourselves in today. Sandy, thanks for joining us for this part two.
I am delighted to be able to do so because this has been what has undergirded my efforts all my professional life, because I grew up in an open town meeting in Massachusetts, the bedrock of democracy in this country.
Yeah, and last week we started to look a little bit about where history education, civics education went off the rail. Want to start with one more example of that to get us warmed up. We found out today that the state standards for history and civics in Minnesota is one of those progressive states whose curriculum in these areas often shapes other states. Minnesota is going to a new curriculum for history that gets rid of any teaching of World War I, World War II, and the Holocaust, literally, to make more room for Black Lives Matter curriculum and LGBTQ activism. So we are erasing the worst genocide in the history of the world in order to emphasize how American blacks and homosexuals and transgenders are the real victims of history. What are your thoughts before we move forward on this, Sandy?
Well, first of all, let's remember that the kids who are going to be exposed to this are not going to benefit from this if they're really losing out on what authentic history was with World War I and World War II, in which all Americans participated, because they're not going to be able to absorb and understand why we were in World War I and World War II, or what the famous battles were. Even if all of them weren't part of the regular army at the time, it doesn't matter. The point is that we have the greatest victories and important dates that come from, say, World War II. Let's take a look at D-Day. For them not to understand what D-Day meant in the context of Hitler's plans for Europe as a whole and the opening up of a second front in Europe. If they don't understand that, then they've lost their understanding of the meaning of D-Day. So they're going to lose out on what the sacrifices were by almost everyone in this country for one of the most important initiatives that we participated in during, for the most part, Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration, because he served for almost 4 terms. And World War II occupied most of the time of the last 4 years, the last piece of his life. And then Harry Truman became president to finish it off. But that's what they've got to understand, the importance of all of that. And if they've missed it, then they've missed what the study of history has been for 200 years, which, as Thomas Jefferson said, you study history to understand yourself. And they're not understanding themselves by looking at only the history of slavery.
Now, Sandy, I think we both know that what you see correctly as a huge oversight in their education, the modern educrat sees as a virtue, right? I mean, why would we show hundreds of thousands of primarily white male Christian soldiers storming the beaches of Normandy to free the world, to help free the world of the menace that was Hitler? All that's going to do is make you think that there are certain aspects of Western culture that are redeemable. It will make you believe that at some point in American history, Americans were good guys and not bad guys. I think the people who put this together in Minneapolis, what you and I see as a glaring hole, they see as a way of forwarding a narrative. And that narrative is that America was unjustly conceived. America was founded on slavery and racism. America has done nothing but exploit and colonize. And therefore, we, in this new moment, this new cultural reset, we're going to strip away everything that America is and remake it in the name of radical progressivism and even quasi-socialism. So, this is the problem I have, Sandy, is it's so obviously we can point out what the problem is, but they don't see it as a problem. And so...
No, and also, this is not material that's going to stimulate or foster any desire or ambition for academic improvement in the very kids they supposedly champion. This is going to depress them even more to see that the kind of material that emphasizes what the oppression, so-called, of these people all of their lives, including today, and maybe they will show the continuing riots all summer long in our major cities. What good did it do recent immigrants and African Americans to have this emphasis on Black America and slavery when it hasn't shown in any event since 1965, the first time that we had the ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, passed under the Lyndon B. Johnson administration. We haven't had anything that has come out of all of this federal involvement in local education that has helped so-called, the quotes, oppressed students as victims. What do you do? Now, I think you're right that really the goal of all of this was to lower the achievement level of those doing better. But it turns out that those doing better are the Asian Americans who've been newer to this country since World War II. So how is that going to make those who think they are victims of white Americans feel when those who are not the victims of white Americans, or who were, in a sense, during World War II, the victims in even a crueler way, because their internments were more recent than slavery back 150 or almost 200 years ago. So you have the people who are no longer oppressed by unfortunate circumstances, now doing better than everybody else.
Well,
what message does that give everybody?
Well, this is not, you asked a great question. How does this benefit African American and Latino kids? It's not only is it not going to help their academic performance, it's going to retard it. It's going to push it back down. It's going to depress them. All this focus on this kind of nastiness as the only aspect of our history. But it does help somebody. Clearly, it helped give the Democrats full control of our politics again. I mean, that standard narrative that is not benefiting inner city kids surely is benefiting the Progressive Party, the Democrat Party in this country, who now controls every aspect of government, and that's a big deal for them. But I want to go back. I want to go back maybe 20 years, Sandy. Before this critical race theory got out of hand, before education was transmuted into an advocate position for basically socialism, the intellectual and ideological transforming of education away from learning and knowledge and achievement and towards ideology and activism, you were working on a set of American history standards. There is a number of civics and history texts that are available that you helped with around the year 2001, 2, and 3 that really were a gold standard. Talk about those books.
All right. The first one, which I mentioned in our last segment of the interview, comes from the Center for Civic Education in Calabasas, California, the National Standards for Civics in Government. There is no excuse for any local history or U.S. government department in a high school, or for a board member who likes the subject and wants to see more taught about it, or something that's honest taught about it, not to be familiar with that textbook, because that was roundly acclaimed by just about everyone. Nobody had any fault to find with what we had for national standards presented on civics and government in that particular volume. And then there is another monograph on what was called the Massachusetts History and Social Science Curriculum Framework, which I oversaw by drawing on the advice of leading historians all over the country, including some that came from other countries in the world. And the date is important. It was either 2003 or 2002 that we have the standards that would be appropriate grade by grade, K through 12, for geography, economics, and civics, as well as using U.S. history as a backbone for understanding all of it. It's all there. It's all been done. It doesn't need to be made up. And then we have a report that just came out yesterday or today in honor of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Day, national holiday, which was yesterday. And that report was, it's only 20 pages altogether, about 20 pages plus appendices. And the top writers were Larry Arnn at Hillsdale College and Carol Swain, who was retired from Vanderbilt University. And this is a report on what all students, Black, Hispanic, as well as Asians, whites, and others, should be studying to understand the basic principles that we should be using in daily life. Looking at our history doesn't necessarily give us what we need to know how to do in daily life when we're part of parent groups or part of school groups, even PTO meetings. So here are materials that are available, and you might even find some groups like Fair Test having material on the testing that they think should be done. They don't like the Common Core based or aligned tests. They would prefer to see performance assessments. There are problems with those. They take a lot of teacher time. So we have problems both with the stances of teacher unions and what some parents may think they need to push. But we have a lot of useful materials already there that have been thought through, and we don't need to recreate new materials. We had a revolution in 1776. So let's use what we then knew afterwards was what was helpful for a successful revolution that was jumped off by a tea party. And we've had tea parties that know also what we need to be able to do at the local level. So we've got the materials there that can be helpful for anybody. I don't know why we have committees that have to form new geography materials. It isn't like a history curriculum has to go up to the present day. History can end for history, and that's it. And then we do contemporary problems of democracy in one semester or 1 week or 1 month if we need to. What do you think about how time should be used at the high school level? That's really what we need school boards to talk about. How should time be used at the high school level?
So let me ask this. Why is it that you have these really good resources? As you say yourself, even many Democrats, most Democrats had nothing to complain about. This is 2002, 2003, right? And maybe some of that agreement, Sandy, maybe some of that agreement, Sandy, has to do with the fact that this is in the very year or two after 9/11, where patriotism was, for a short period of time, revived, where bipartisanism, for a very short period of time, seemed to work in the government. I don't know what effect 9/11 may have had on unifying briefly the country, but we had these wonderful resources, and they were balanced, and the left and the right both seemed to approve of them. How come they never got any real play anywhere?
Part of the problem, you have a very good question that we have to think about. Why are the history curricula in our high schools so weak? Why are the AP materials so weak on what our basic principles are that we should be seeing as undergirding the Constitution, even an understanding of the Constitution? What is the problem that we faced after 9/11? And a lot of people don't understand that what history teachers were being taught at the college level was part of the problem, and what they were being trained to do in their education school preparation programs was also part of the problem. We didn't have a translation into education schools or even in academic coursework. That was something I tried to correct in Massachusetts. I got a bit of a way into correcting the fact that we needed U.S. government teachers who actually knew a little bit about U.S. government. And of course, our students did better in government and in history than a lot of other students elsewhere in the country did. But I was aiming to strengthen the teachers, and that is part of what we still need today. And we don't see a push coming about how we strengthen academically the teachers, just the students. We need more, for example, Jaime Escalantes in mathematics. They're the ones who will give us the stronger math students, possibly among Hispanic students, but elsewhere too.
So, all right, I agree with you that and maybe one way we could do this. Obviously, the teachers need to be strengthened, but the problem is that the education departments at universities are going the other way. They're not trying to reinforce serious breadth in history. I promise you, education departments in history programs across the country don't care if their teachers understand the founding of this country, and don't care if the teachers understand much about the Constitution. This is about liberating the traditional minority kid from this white racist system. It's about waking kids up who are minorities to their victimhood. So, but you mentioned Jaime Escalante. Why aren't more serious Black and Hispanic scholars of history, like you mentioned, former Vanderbilt professor Swaim, Carol Swaim, who I have interviewed on this program. She's wonderful. Why are not more voices like that speaking out? We get it. If you're white, you're part of the problem. But we have a number of great economists and historians and social scientists who are of color. Why aren't they coming to the defense here and offering minority kids another perspective from a minority point of view than what the progressives are giving them?
Let me ask you what you think laziness as a problem with younger people, including young adults, has. Because I've often wondered why we don't have these scholars coming from. History used to be, for example, one of the favorite subjects for undergraduates. Now it's not anymore. So what has happened? It requires a lot of reading and a lot of thinking and a lot of discussion, but you have to remember a lot. So what has happened? Is laziness part of our problem?
No, I don't think it is, Sandy, because I think that it has always been the responsibility of teachers to make any subject matter interesting, right? I mean, kids will get behind. If you're enthusiastic about what you're teaching, the kids are going to get behind you. If you love your subject matter and you know your subject matter, the kids will follow. Here's the problem. Teachers aren't excited about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Founding Fathers. They're not excited about the arc of American history. What they're excited about now, these teachers, is radical critical race theory. So if our kids are going to get anything that the teachers are excited about, it's that. And so that's where you see the focus from many of the kids. As I see these kids, I am a still teaching university freshman. They come to me and this wouldn't surprise you, I think, but last semester, it went from August through December. We're about to start the second semester. I had a group of first semester freshmen, 25 of them, right out of high school. They admitted to me that not one of them had ever read a book cover to cover when they were in high school. Not once. That all they ever read were excerpts, the Common Core stuff, right? They break it up, they give them Common Core.
But part of the problem is that to have a deeper understanding of the American Revolution, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, takes time. You have to read lots of books. And I don't know, it's more than just laziness, but there is an element of laziness in not wanting to spend the time, to commit the time, to do the kind of reading and writing. Writing takes a lot more time than reading, and we have had a problem with student writing that's growing now. I keep asking for examples of student writing that go with college literature courses. I can't even find examples because professors won't give me examples. I'm trying to see how they correlate the writing that students do with the reading that they do. You have to find out if they're doing good reading, challenging reading, but then it doesn't automatically translate into a good sentence structure, into good written material. That's going to come later. And I've looked at it with young children, and you can see the growth is much later. They start to read in first grade. They start to do fairly decent writing by fifth or sixth grade. There's about a 5-year gap in kids' development when they're young between the quality of the reading they do and the quality of the writing that they can do. But that's only one piece of this vast puzzle. Why have students and teachers abandoned the most successful community, society that we can point to? They can't even point to a more successful society. So what are they gaining for their students out of the mess that they have created?
Sandy, let me ask you this. This is the last question because we're out of time, but I want you to comment on this. You were on the Common Core Advisory Board. You were hired by Common Core to vet their English program, and you didn't. You did not think
I was on the validation committee, yeah.
And you did not think that was rigorous enough. And I just mentioned something, I think, that I want you to comment on, and we'll close out this segment. We'll be back again at this next week for the third segment. But one of the things that caught my eye immediately was the downplaying of reading literary texts under Common Core. They wanted to transition over to informational texts. Why are kids reading complicated poetry? Why are they reading sophisticated novels when they should be reading how to turn on a blender manuals or government propaganda pieces, informational literature, number one. And the second thing that horrified me about Common Core English was let's not focus on long narratives. Let's have them read lots of selections. So even though Shakespeare remained one of the few recommended classics in the suggestion guide of Common Core reading, you were not going to read all of Shakespeare. You were going to take a play and you'll read a couple of modern translations of a couple of passages. You'll read a couple of little snippets here and there, and then you move on. With what you just said, what we need to do to make kids read and write, by definition, this new approach that Common Core signifies is doing exactly the opposite. Your thoughts on that?
It's doing the opposite because the demand isn't there, and it's aimed at the bottom. This is one thing that teachers have been willing to tell me a little about because they're afraid to say too much that is critical of the Common Core project. But they look at where the material is pitched, and they will say that any good teacher knows that if you want students to advance, you aim for the top in a classroom. It doesn't matter what you're teaching. It doesn't mean that you give only challenging material to the class, but you give the low students goals to aim for. They see that there are students who can be successful with difficult materials. But if you aim for the bottom, you pull the top down. And that's what Common Core has done. It has pulled the top down. It hasn't pulled the bottom up, which is what we were told and what local school boards were told, that somehow everyone was going to be ready for college. Didn't turn out that way. And it can't turn out that way when your ambition is to be focused on the bottom, to get the bottom over a bar. I lived through the age of competencies, and we had that in the 1980s. And every teacher in a school system, particularly the high schools, the secondary grades, knew that there was a problem in just trying to get the bottom over the bar that would say that they were competent at whatever the skill was that they felt was needed. And so you want to be able to aim for the top, and Common Core can't do that because it thinks in its own misguided way. And this was Gates' problem. He hired all the wrong people, and he still uses the wrong people. He spent a fortune, and he's got an investment in what his fortune has bought him, but it's all going to the wrong people, because all the people he has chosen, not a one of them has accomplished anything for any group of kids. And I keep thinking, is that really what a businessman would want as success? Nothing that is successful out of what you put all your money in, and you keep throwing in more money. So that's part of the issue, that you've had this megalomaniac philanthropist who has hired the wrong people, who have aimed for the bottom, and they don't aim for the top, and they don't pull up the bottom, they just pull down the top. And that's what you've been pointing out.
And Sandy, there is a way of looking at this from Gates' perspective. Maybe Bill Gates is less interested in making kids entrepreneurial and independent in school, and more concerned about making them conformists, right? I mean, that would explain this. And so maybe he is getting his full investment. Maybe he is getting, for lack of a better word, a bunch of dumbed down kids where there is nobody feeling bad because anybody else is getting too far ahead of them. I want to
deception. Then what you're saying has been this great act of deception.
That's right.
Which local school boards have bought hook,
Yep.
line, and sinker.
Yep.
And I was on a state board of education for a while, and everybody all thought that if they were being sold a set of standards that said all kids are going to go to college, that this had to be better than anything else that anybody could ever come up with, even though there was no way teachers could teach differently to kids who couldn't read or write to begin with. So where did it leave the school systems? So they've played around, and they've come up almost with what happened in Stalin's era. You had 5-year plans that weren't real 5-year plans. So you have these NAEP scores that keep showing us how awful the scores are of these kids. But then there's a little bit of supposedly bouncing up, and I don't know where they get their hope from, but more federal money comes in, because the idea is that if kids do badly, then that means you need more money. And the money, we have no idea what it's spent on, because the kids' scores get worse.
Well,
gaps have increased.
By
so
way
what do?
By way of wrapping this up, the one thing we do know, with the incoming Biden administration, there will be lots more money and lots less accountability. If you're looking for a renaissance in academic achievement, I think you're going to have to wait at least 4 years.